Hi guys. Okay, three things in the title of this video. We are going to talk about substitution failure, indirect reference, and customary sense. How those things relate to each other. Substitution failure is something that Frege identifies as a problem for his theory or an objection to his theory. The way he solves it is by identifying, saying something about what he calls indirect reference, which he's going to claim is the same thing as customary sense. We'll get onto all of those things. But I want to start with a bit of taking a step back and looking at the picture we have so far of different kinds of word meaning, according to Frege, and how the principle of compositionality applies to those things, because that's we're going to need those to set up the problem. Okay, so let's start here. So pre-Frege, we can at least say there's a distinction between these two kinds of things. There's words and there's the things that they refer to out in the world. So take an example of one kind of word is a name. So say something like the name, spelled Venus, pronounced Venus. I'm trying to say something that makes it clear I'm talking about the word and not the planet Venus, because the planet out there in the sky is the reference of that name. Okay, this word that consists of 5 letters is a name of, refers to the planet out there. Okay. One answer to the question, what does this word mean, is, well, it means that planet. What does this mean? It means that place. Frege suggests there's another level of meaning aside from reference. It's totally fine to call reference meaning, but there's another kind of meaning that Frege is going to call sense. What exactly is a sense? It's a little bit mysterious. It's something like a mode of presentation, or it's the way that this name refers to that planet out there. But I don't know exactly what they are. Frege doesn't know exactly what they are either, so I'm going to put it in a little cloud to suggest this is a little bit sort of airy and mysterious. Okay, I'm putting a number 1 at the end of this sense just to suggest there might be other senses. Okay, this is also something you can call the meaning of the word Venus, the sense that it expresses. Okay, an important thing about this picture is the difference between the levels in the following sense. So you can have 2 different senses that have the same reference. So let me take another example, something like the name The Evening Star. That has a different sense from the sense expressed by the name Venus. Let's call it sense 2. But it has the same reference. Okay, so you can have 2 different senses that have the same reference. Similarly, you can have 2 different words that have the same sense. So maybe like instead of the evening star, if I wrote the star of the evening, that probably has just the same sense. Star of evening. So I've changed words, but I get the same sense. Since it has the same sense, Frege says it's got to have the same reference. Any given sense should just have one specific reference. It's not going to have multiple references, but one reference, one object in the world might be the reference of multiple different senses. Okay. That's enough for us to state the principle of compositionality. So, compositionality, as I'm about to define it, is going to centrally involve replacing one word with another. So, here's what we want to say. Oh, sorry, I need to add one more thing. We can take simple words like Venus or evening star or star of the evening and embed them in larger expressions. So right now I just have one name, Venus, and another name, star of the evening. I can make this into something more complex by putting some words in between them. I can say Venus is the star of the evening. Now I have this thing as a whole is now a sentence. Okay, once we have that sentence as a whole, we can ask, instead of just asking what's the sense of each of its parts, what's the reference of each of its parts, we can ask what's the sense, what's the reference of the thing as a whole. Okay. So associated with this entire sentence is going to be some other sense. I'm just going to put it down here just so we can keep the two pictures separate. I'll use red for the sentence as a whole. So we'll have another sense, sense 3. And that's going to have some reference. Now, you remember Frege says the reference of an entire sentence is either true or false. The reference of a complete declarative sentence like this, something that aims to state a fact, is either true or false depending on whether the sentence is true or false. We're not going to worry about his argument for that right now. Let's just take that for granted. Okay, now, Frege is going to say, suppose we change this sentence. Suppose we replace some of these words. This is the substitution that's going to lead to substitution failure. Right now, we're just doing substitution. We're not doing failure yet. I'll get on to failure. Remember before, I had different words in this spot. Instead of star of the evening, I had evening star. So, Frege is going to say, if you take some words in your sentence and replace them, substitute other words that have the same sense, then the sense of the sentence as a whole can't change. That's compositionality of sense. Okay, because I did change what was in this space, but when I made that change, I didn't change the sense of the thing in that space. Therefore, the sense of the whole big red thing can't have changed. Similarly, if I replace those words with some other words that have maybe a different sense but the same reference, then the reference of the sentence as a whole can't change. So if I put in here the morning star, that has a different sense. So we have to call this like sense 4. The sense of the sentence of the name the morning star is not the same as the sense of the sentence. It's not the same as the sense of the name the evening star. Okay, the sense here has changed. So that means the sense of the sentence as a whole might have changed. So we might now have not sense 3, but some different sense. But could the reference of the sentence as a whole have changed? No, because the reference of the thing I replaced evening star with hasn't changed. So I'm still, at the level of reference, I'm still plugging in the same kind of thing. I got to it a different way, but it's the same thing. Therefore, if we're looking at the sentence as a whole, the reference cannot have changed, although the sense may have changed. And since the reference of a complete sentence is its truth value, that means that when I do this replacement, the sentence can't go from true to false, or from false to true. Okay, that's the kind of substitution we're interested in. We're interested in substitution of one name for another name with the same reference. Substitution failure happens when it looks like we've done that. It looks like we've replaced one name with a different name that has the same reference, and yet our sentence as a whole has gone from true to false. So what's an example of that? Let me clear this out. So here's an example of an ordinary sentence. Superman is Clark Kent. That's one sentence. I'm going to now replace the name Superman with another name that has the same reference. So we'll get a second sentence. Clark Kent is Clark Kent. Okay, this is going to look like those identity statements that Frege started out with. We don't have substitution failure yet. Okay, if sentence 1 is true, sentence 2 has to be true as well, right? Sentence 1 is true just in case Superman and Clark Kent, those two names have the same reference. I'm going to stipulate they do. That's normally true, I think, in Superman stories. Okay, I'm going to change these sentences. I'm going to add something in so that we do get substitution failure. I'm going to add the same thing to both sentences so that we still have the pattern we need. Oops, I'm off frame. I'm going to add Lois believes Superman is Clark Kent. Lois believes Clark Kent is Clark Kent. Okay, in most of the Superman stories, Lois doesn't know who Superman is. But she does know that Clark Kent is himself, because she's taken a logic class or something, and she knows that most reporters are self-identical. So this sentence looks true, but this sentence looks false. How is that possible when the only difference between the two is one of them has Clark Kent, the name Clark Kent in this position, and the other one has the name Superman in that position. But Superman and Clark Kent have the same reference. Those two names have the same reference. Therefore, these two sentences should have the same reference, and that means they should have the same truth value. So this is the problem of substitution failure. Okay, I said that was the problem. Frege's theory seems to predict that these two sentences should have the same truth value, but in fact, he observes they don't. Not these ones. He didn't know about Superman, but similar kinds of sentences. The solution he's going to give involves distinguishing between indirect reference and customary reference. Distinguishing between, indirect reference and customary reference. How does that work? Okay, let's take a look at the paper now. So here we are on the bottom of 154 or page 28, depending on which pagination you're looking at. So let's just read this bit here. Frege says, if words are used in the ordinary way, what one intends to speak of is their reference, their Bedeutung. So when I'm speaking in a normal way, when I say Venus is the morning star, I'm trying to talk about not the words, not their sense, but the planet itself. That's the reference. Okay. It can also happen, however, that one wishes to talk about the words themselves or their sense. This happens, for instance, when the words of another are quoted. One's own words then first designate or refer to, or bedeuten, words of the other speaker, and only the latter have their usual Bedeutung. The words of the other speaker have their usual reference. We then have signs of signs. In writing, the words are in this case enclosed in quotation marks. Accordingly, a word standing between quotation marks must not be taken as having its ordinary reference. Okay, this is a stepping stone to getting us to indirect reference. Let's examine what he's talking about. Let me give you an example. So suppose I say to you something like, something about Superman. Suppose I say to you, Superman can fly. Now, that's true, let's say. Because I'm just speaking ordinarily, this is in ordinary speech, I'm trying to speak about the reference of my words, the Bedeutung of my words. I'm trying to talk about the actual guy out there who can fly. That means you should be able to substitute the name Clark Kent. So if I said Clark Kent can fly, that's also true. Okay. So because we're speaking about the reference here, I can substitute any other name with the same reference, and that should preserve the reference of the sentence as a whole, which is the truth value of the sentence as a whole. On the other hand, suppose I'm not speaking to you directly. Suppose these words come out of my mouth after the following words. Suppose I tell you, Lois said, quotation mark, Superman can fly, close quotation marks. In this case, I'm directly quoting. I'm sure you've, in previous classes or in high school or something, learned about the difference between direct and indirect quotation. Direct quotation looks like this. You have quotation marks, and then you get the exact words that the person used. You do not change them at all. This is not where you put things in your own words. That's what the quotation marks indicate. They indicate these are the exact words that came from Lois. Frege says we can understand that in terms of sense and reference and substitution. When the words Superman can fly appear between quotation marks, I can no longer substitute the name Clark Kent here. If what Lois said is, if the words that came out of her mouth were Superman can fly, if I say Lois said, quote, Clark Kent can fly, end quote, that would be false. How's that possible when Superman and Clark Kent, those two names have the same reference? Frege's answer is, when you put those words between quotation marks, they no longer refer to the guy out in the world. They now refer to the name itself. That's why the only thing I can substitute in here to get a true sentence, to guarantee I'm going to get a true sentence, is the same word. Whenever you have words in between quotation marks, the words don't refer to what they customarily or ordinarily refer to, what they would refer to normally if there weren't any quotation marks around. When they're between quotation marks, they refer to the words themselves. And that's why you can't substitute anything different. You don't get to change the words at all. Okay. I said this was a stepping stone. What he's going to give us right after this, he's just talked about how reference changes when you're in a context of direct quotation, that is when you're between quotation marks. I also said you probably learned a difference between direct and indirect quotation. Well, the indirect in indirect reference is exactly that indirect of indirect quotation. So suppose I take the quotation marks away and I say something like, Lois said, let's add in, just to make this clear, Lois said that Superman can fly. I might be able to substitute some other words, right? I can put this in my own words. That's the thing. I don't get to change just anything. What exactly can I change? Let's see what Frege says about these kinds of things. Here's a hint. He's going to say, we're going to talk about the sense of something. So in order to speak of the sense of an expression A, one may simply use the phrase, the sense of the expression A. That's not interesting. I don't want you to pay too much attention to that. Here's something else, though. In indirect speech, and indirect speech here means something like indirect quotation, like this example of quoting with said, that, and then using your own words to say what somebody said. In indirect speech, one talks about the sense, for example, of another person's remarks. It is quite clear that in this way of speaking, words do not have their customary reference, but designate what is usually their sense. I just want to pause here, just for the terminology. In the title here, we have indirect reference, customary sense. So the reference of words when you're in a context of indirect speech, that's your indirect reference. In that case, words don't have their customary reference, but they have what is usually their sense, that is their customary sense. So this is what Frege says now. In order to have a short expression, we will say, in indirect speech, words are used indirectly or have their indirect reference. We distinguish accordingly the customary from the indirect reference of a word and its customary sense from its indirect sense. The indirect reference of a word is accordingly its customary sense. Such exceptions must always be borne in mind if the mode of connection between sign, sense, and reference in particular cases is to be correctly understood. So let's come back to this case of substitution failure. Let's look at this thing. Let's just deal first with indirect quotation. So if I'm telling you about Lois's words, how am I allowed to change this? Well, if I want to tell you Lois said that Superman can fly, what can I replace the name Superman with? I mean, I could maybe put in something like, I don't know, Soups, if that's a pet name, or like the Man of Steel. So if the words that came out of Lois Lane's mouth were Superman can fly, I think I can reasonably report that Lois said that the Man of Steel can fly. Maybe Soups is just a little bit silly. Nobody calls him that. I think this is an acceptable paraphrase. You can argue with me if you like. Why would that be? Frege's story is going to be the name Superman and the name Man of Steel in a normal sentence, if there wasn't all this context around, would have not just the same reference, but the same sense. They pick out the same person in the same way. And that's why it's safe for me to substitute one for the other in this sentence without taking it from true to false. If I'm saying that I can substitute one for the other without taking it from true to false, that for Frege means in this sentence they have the same reference. So here's what we're saying. The fact that in ordinary sentences, in customary use, these two things have the same sense. That means that in this special sentence where I'm telling you about what Lois said, now they have the same reference. Because they had the same sense before, now they have the same reference. Because in an ordinary context, they would have the same sense. In a context of indirect quotation, they have the same reference. Okay. On the other hand, this also explains why I can't substitute in Clark Kent. If the words that came out of Lois Lane's mouth, Lois Lane, who doesn't know that Superman is Clark Kent, if the words that came out of Lois Lane's mouth were Superman can fly, I would make a mistake if I reported to you, Lois said that Clark Kent can fly. You would be like, wait, oh, she's probably figured out who he is then, because like normal reporters can't fly, right? Frege would say, the first sentence looks true. So if I say, Lois said Superman can fly, that sounds true. Lois Lane said Clark Kent can fly, that looks false. That means this is a case of substitution failure. Frege's answer is, this just looks like a case of substitution failure. What's really going on is, like, this looks like a case of substitution failure because normally Clark Kent and Superman have the same reference. But in this special kind of sentence, when it comes after Lois said that, they no longer have the same reference. Now, what used to be their sense, their customary sense, is their reference. And that's why this sentence can go from true to false when you make the substitution. Okay, and the same goes for context like believes that. So when I say Lois Lane believes that Superman is Clark Kent, that can be false, even though Lois Lane believes that Clark Kent is true. That's because, so the normal picture would be, this has, let's call it sense 1, put it in clouds, and that points to the guy out in the world who can fly. This points to something else, sense 2. And that points to the same guy out in the world. That's the normal picture. That's the customary picture. But because of these words, Lois believes that, because these words come in a context of indirect speech, Frege says they don't actually refer to the guy out in the world anymore. Those senses do, but these words don't. Why? Because now they refer to, they don't just express these sentences, these senses, they refer to them. Remember on the Fregean picture though, whenever you have a name that refers to some object, it has to do so by means of a sense. Well, they've got to have some other sense in this case too. He doesn't have a lot to say about what these senses are like, but if you like, because these words are in this context of indirect speech, that means they're going to have an indirect sense. That's this new sense that we're inventing in order to explain how they can refer to their indirect reference, which is the same thing as their customary sense. That is, the thing they refer to in a sense, in a sentence like these ones, is the thing that would normally be their sense. Okay, so this guy here is also an indirect sense. This guy here is an indirect reference, which is a customary sense. Okay, that's the deal. Frege is going to say, when you have these kinds of cases of apparent substitution failure, really they're not substitution failure. Compositionality isn't failing, it's succeeding because the references of the words involved are different than what they normally are. And so, in fact, these two names that normally have the same reference, now they don't. I've made a huge mess, and so now I'm going to stop this recording. I hope this helps. Send me questions.